All right. So I'm talking about QI, quality improvement, right? And so for surgeons, but it also applies to non-surgeons, right? To APPs. And I'm going to try to give you some lessons drawn from professional sports, right? Hopefully add a little bit of levity to this topic. So Patrick Mahomes here, right? Are all NFL quarterbacks equally talented? Right? Clearly, I think I see your head shaking. They are not. Are professional sports both physically and mentally demanding? I think we would all agree that they are. Are all surgeons equally talented? I see people nodding. They're not. Is surgery both physically and mentally demanding? And I think we would agree that it is. So what do these two individuals have in common? Years of preparation and sacrifices. Well, for both of them. Part of a select few that were chosen or drafted based on their performance. Remember, we were drafted. You had to submit rank lists. They had to submit rank lists. We had to find out on a given day where we were going. Under pressure to produce results. Well, that's clearly true for both of us. But what about our attitude towards criticism, to having our performance critiqued? What about our attitude to devoting effort to getting better? Is it the same? I would tell you that often it is not. Okay? So my objectives in the time that we have is to identify some parallels between surgeons and athletes, to discuss the concepts of coachability, of physician coaching. Okay? It's a big part of what I do in practice. Highlight valuable components for a collaborative QI conference. We don't call it M&M anymore, but it is the same kind of material that's being discussed when we're trying to get better. We've changed our approach, some ways good, maybe some ways not as good. But we want to describe some actions today for meaningful change. So let's think about the concept of the surgeon-athlete. There is definitely a physical component to surgery, but it's really more about judgment, and judgment comes from experience. Okay? Performance eventually peaks, right? Is it an age thing? Maybe, right? There's plenty of literature on this, especially in the general surgery space. But whenever you peak, and you will peak at some point, you have nowhere to go but down. That's the whole point of a peak, right? Same thing in professional sports, same thing in medicine. Athletes of the highest degree have coaches. Coaches who can't even do what those athletes can do. They're asking for advice from somebody who can't even do what they can do. And they're not indignant to it. They'll switch teams to find it, okay? Very few can maintain their best performance on their own. One of my former colleagues and mentors was a guy named Gordon McClory. Love the guy, okay? He told me in the OR, amongst a lot of things I can't repeat here, but he would say, never be the kind of surgeon who only listens to himself. All right. How would you choose your surgeon? You guys are in the know, right? Let's say you have to have surgery tomorrow. How are you going to pick who's going to do it? Reputation? Well, I'm sure that's going to be part of it. Level of experience? Absolutely. Outcomes. What about outcomes? You want to know what their outcomes were 20 years ago, or do you want to know what their outcomes are recently? Do you want outcomes from the institution, or do you want outcomes from the individual you're thinking about hiring? Do you want to know how many championships the Patriots have won, or do you want to know how good is Mac Jones when you're trying to figure out who's going to start, today? So Joe Namath, right? Broadway Joe was a national champ at Alabama. Drafted number 1, played for the Jets. It was 1965. He was the first quarterback to ever pass for 4,000 yards in a season, was MVP twice, Super Bowl champ. But eventually his production went down, right? Went to the Rams, played a couple games, but then mostly sat the bench, and then that was it. But he played to his strengths because he realized his strengths were now elsewhere, and they were in entertainment, and the guy killed it, right? Some of you may have either watched the movie, read the book, or both on Moneyball. If you haven't, you should, all right? It talks about the concept of sabermetrics and what they were using for analytics. We don't use metrics enough. We don't assess our own metrics and our own outcomes enough to improve, to guide our patients, to guide ourselves. So there's a scene where, this guy's playing David Justice, who was a baseball player, and Stephen Bishop's the actor, and Billy Beane, who's being played by Brad Pitt, says to him, because the guy's very indignant about his current role, right? Because it's different than what it used to be. He says, I'm not paying you for the player you used to be. I'm paying you for the player you are right now. And it's kind of like the concept, like at one point this was your role, but now I'm using you to mentor these younger players, right? I'm shifting that role because you're valuable, but you have to understand being valuable to a different area doesn't make you invaluable, and right, you just have to play to your strengths. So, let's see if this starts. But this is just an example. You pull this from YouTube, and this was highlighted in a recent series. This is Patrick Mahomes' workout video. And it's the whole concept of constantly striving to be better, even if you're at the top of your game, right? He analyzes past performance. He watches the tape. Do you watch your tape? right? Ever watch yourself operate, look for ways to get better? Plans for each endeavor with a knowledge of audibles, because sometimes you go in with an A and a B plan and you have to get down to a G plan. It's a lot like surgery, especially in reconstructive surgery. And then at the end, he has to stand before a critique panel when my Lions kicked his ass. But you get the idea that it's the same thing when you get called to the mat if a surgical case doesn't go the way you want it to, or the clinical care doesn't go the way you want it to. But he stands up there, and a good quarterback is going to take it on the chin for the team and say, yeah, we can get better. This is the way we can get better, and we're going to focus on that, right? But sometimes that seems like it's very difficult for us to embrace that same philosophy. Why did I pick a quarterback for this discussion? Okay, both surgeons and quarterbacks are team leaders. Leaders in the OR, leader in the clinic, maybe your department, you get the idea. You have to be able to read the field and call audibles in a pinch, and you have to be able to execute the play, right? People are looking at you. When things go great, right, quarterbacks get the praise, right? Surgeon gets the praise, and when they don't, they get the blame. And the best quarterbacks know not to divert the blame to their teammates. And I would say the same is true about surgeons. So if something doesn't go wrong and you're pointing the finger at everybody, this patient didn't stop smoking, or this person wasn't this, or this instrument this, and SPD this, right? You want to think about that. You're probably doing it wrong. And remember, I've said this before, urology is a team sport. So this is a great article, okay? And I some of the names on here are very familiar to me because I worked with them as a resident back in Detroit. So they had 20 surgeons watch peer video. Basically video of everyone recorded themselves doing the same operation, and then they blinded it. And people would just watch the video, and they rated the skill level that was perceived just by watching it. And it was a 1 to 5 scale, and the mean ratings ranged from 2.6 to 4.8. Just based on the scores, which were pretty consistent, right? People could tell the difference between an operation that was done beautifully and one that was maybe not quite as sharp. Compared to the top quartile, the bottom quartile, just on visual ratings, had significantly greater complication rates, mortality, operative time, and rates of reoperation. They're not equal, right? So they suggested that a peer rating of operative skill may be an effective strategy for assessing a surgeon's proficiency. We don't like being critiqued. We don't like being graded, certainly not by peers. We were all trained to be competitive people. That's how we got here in the first place, right? Video analysis, okay? So this is really interesting. So this is called SEARCH. So this was done by, it's a computer vision model, and it was used for surgical phase detection. They looked at 281 prostatectomy videos, okay? It allows comparisons between videos and synchronized playback, and you can actually click on these nodes, those little circles, to go to a specific phase, and it shows where everybody is and the differences there. And the learners found it improved their task efficiency and self-confidence. The lead author of this just emailed me this morning. Okay, these are not physicians, okay? But this is where we're headed, I think, and I think AI is going to be important. So this is my cousin Scott McCurley. He played football at Pitt, won a Super Bowl with the Packers, and now is a linebackers coach for Dallas Cowboys. I interviewed him for the purpose of putting this talk together, and I said, what have you noticed is the difference between college and the pros and these players, as far as how they embrace coaching? And he says as they mature, they recognize more and more that they need it. They want it. They want to get better, and they recognize that value of mentorship and senior leadership, right? So think about that moving forward. Are we doing the same thing, or are we actually going in the opposite direction? There's an open forum for feedback in the pros, right? When they all meet to discuss the prior week's performance and what they have coming up, but they individualize strategies for each person or each role player to get better. We need to think about doing the same thing. They have dynamic role assignments, right? You have to play to your strengths. So I think about one of our players, University of Michigan. Yeah, I know the sign stealing thing going on right now, but I am a Michigan guy. And, we had a player who started out as a wideout, right? And then he switched to defense, and he's killing it, right? So think about that. Look at peer pressure, not always, but a lot of times it can be a positive. Missteps are opportunities for learning. We do have to avoid the shame and blame culture. We used to rake people across the coals at M&M conference. We'd still walk out friends, but it still probably wasn't the most productive approach. Now, coachability, right? You need to be open to the possibility of needing further growth. Everyone can get better. The top athletes can do this. We can do it in sports. We can do it in medicine. Right? It takes a mental diligence. There's a concept of Kaizen, right? This is a Japanese term, right? So Toyota was big about this. It's the concept or the quest for perpetual improvement, right? You never stall. But, you want to seek immersive mentorship. It's one of the values of training programs, but it's the value of communities like this. All of you in here, we are a community of, providers in urology. We are each other's support network. So Michael Jordan, right, the GOAT, greatest of all time, said his greatest skill was that he was coachable. He was a sponge and he was aggressive to learn. His coaches, Dean Smith, said the same thing. Phil Jackson said the same thing about him. And they thought that that's why he was better than Kobe. What's in it for you? Well, why spend time looking at outcomes if nobody's paying you to, right? I mean, is that a mindset? Is that what you're thinking, right? Why embrace a QI conference and face criticism from a community where schadenfreude is a real thing, right? Are people taking delight in your missteps? Is it making them feel better about themselves? Is that your perception? Could also be reality, right? You need to think about it. What's in it for me, and are these the barriers to me getting better? Why should you be open to the notion that your strengths may lie in an area other than your current focus? The answer is, it's because you care, right? And you should care. You should care about your patients, and you should care about your reputation. Better performance leads to improved confidence, which further improves performance. I can't tell you how critical it is to be confident as a surgeon, just like it is for an athlete. A case shakes your confidence, you go in there, and I'm telling you, you get the yips, just like somebody standing at the plate, right, facing down that 105-mile-an-hour fastball. It will lower your stress level, which will then improve your quality of life. Leads to better efficiency, and better efficiency makes you more profitable. So I'm trying to tap into everything people care about. What are the barriers to coachability? Well, this concept, I'm an expert. I already put in my time for training and being evaluated. I'm not going to do that anymore. Who are they to tell me how to do things? Humans evade critique and exposure, even though we may feel like the other guy could use coaching. So even though everybody nods when I say, are all surgeons created equal? And they're like, of course not, right? Some surgeons are better than others, right? Everybody thinks that they're the one better than the others, right? So you need to think about always getting better. But how do you get there? We need to address this flawed concept in residency training and fellowship of watch one, do one, teach one. It's not that simple. That's an oversimplification. Every physician has an area in which they can improve, despite any amount of money they've made and despite the amount of gray hair on their head. Technique can get better, work-life balance could get better, time management could get better, your teaching style could get better. I think those of us who went through residency training programs could easily tell you that there were some people that were great surgeons and lousy educators, and some people that were great educators and maybe weren't as good surgically, right? Play to their strengths. Think about the path to expertise. Unconscious incompetence moves to conscious incompetence, moves to conscious competence, and then unconscious competence, where it's just like, poetry in motion when you're in the operating room. So, just as in sports, coaching should address things, at least in medicine, such as mechanics, conditioning, judgment, and strategy, but all with effective communication, all right? I saw in Casey's talk, he had a cover of a book on complications by Atul Gawande, and he talks a lot about physician coaching and what he used in bringing in a more senior surgeon just to watch him and take notes and give it to him afterwards his case and say, here's some areas where I think this case could have gone better. That's useful. It may be protective against burnout. It's collaborative, right? It's the idea that I'm growing. I'm not stagnating. And there's a growing pool of retired surgeons and consulting services becoming available to take advantage of. So think about it, like, the Madden play-by-play, telestration. I do the same thing with my fellows, right? I record my own video, right, and I'll put things in line, but I can do that with an in-light camera of a fellow's performance doing the same case, and I can show side by side what was done differently and what lends itself to more efficient surgery. So think about the wisdom of crowds when you approach a QI conference, right? Group decisions are better than those made by a single member. You do want to avoid groupthink, right? So it needs to be structured appropriately. And the best decisions are a product of disagreement and contest. So here's my tips and action items for you to take home. Embrace and trust the process. Doesn't mean it can't get better, right? But you just don't throw it out, right? Work on making it better. Openly ask and perhaps demand for honest feedback, right? It's going to help you, right? It's okay to be vulnerable in that sense. Intentionally focus on being coachable and willing to change and express gratitude to team members rather than just being indignant about the idea that somebody would give you some pointers. And as I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again in talks as I move forward the rest of my career, aim small, miss small, but still give yourself credit for the wins, all right? I want you to just say a quick word about being like Geno Smith, okay? Maybe his season this year is not as great as it was last year, but unlike, Patrick Mahomes, who's the MVP, and I put at the beginning of this talk, and everybody wants to shoot for to be the best athlete in the NFL, Geno was the most improved player of the year and the comeback player of the year last year, right? And I think that's what we're really shooting for in our day-to-day. So with that, I thank you, and I'll invite all the speakers up for our panel.